Professor Riggs, you spoke at the memorial service for these three students who were killed in North Carolina. There was maybe 100 people here. And one thing you brought up was very interesting, this idea that there's more to the hatred of Muslims than just sort of random prejudice. That you mentioned an article or a report called Islamophobia Incorporated. What do you mean by that?
Well, the Center for American Progress published a report a few years ago called Islamophobia Inc., and it traces in pretty compelling detail the development of a well-funded strategy to stigmatize the Muslims in this country, in the U.S. It's funded by a number of very wealthy, billionaires who are funneling money to a variety of pseudo think tanks and groups, lobbying groups, to try to influence Congress members, to try to publish reports that call Muslims not true Americans, or insinuate that Islam is not a true religion, and a variety of other very negative propaganda against Muslim Americans. And my argument is that mission of the variety of different wealthy donors and their cohort of supporters is leading to this, is in part the reason behind the generally negative view that a lot of Americans hold of Muslims who are also Americans.
Now, I know you read this report a couple of years ago. Do you remember some of the names, or maybe?
Well, somebody named Adelson,
Adelson.
who I know is a big supporter. There was Alan Dershowitz at Harvard, who is actually kind of on the second tier. He and some people like Daniel Pipes and others, Pam Geller and a few others, they're at what I would call at the second tier level. They're receiving the funding and the money and the support from these donors, and they've set up a variety of think tanks, things like the Middle East Forum and a number of other groups. The Anti-Defamation League, unfortunately, although its mission is to combat anti-Semitism, unfortunately, they have mixed their mission, I believe, in some ways through this. I think Foxman may have been named in that report as well. But, these are some big names, but there's a lot of smaller fish also that are involved in this sort of project. I mean, of course, it's a bit controversial because the Center for American Progress is arguing that there's a concerted effort on the part of a group of people in the U.S., some very wealthy and some who are recipients of that wealth, to stigmatize a portion of the population. But I think their argument was pretty compelling.
So to combat some of this hatred towards Muslims, it's not just enough to sort of talk about hatred, but really to attack some of these organizations that are deliberately spreading lies and hatred, and to talk about their funders.
Yeah, I mean, I think I used the word fight against them, but I meant it in a sort. I emphasized that it was in a nonviolent way, that it should be more, maybe the better word to use would have been to counter the arguments they're making with better arguments, and use the same strategies they're using. Use the media, use reports and education, and really try to flood the media with more positive images of Muslim Americans, because unfortunately I believe this is the same old story we have in America over its existence, which is that you have a new group of immigrants arrive and they're treated as other with a capital O. You had this with the Italian Americans, you had this with Irish and Germans, you had this with the Jews, certainly, right? There was a period of time where the Jews weren't even allowed to study at the Ivy League universities, as surprising as that might be. So,
last question, how are things at UB in regard to Islamophobia or relations between people here?
I've taught at a number of universities and colleges before I came here, and I've been very pleasantly surprised at how open-minded and tolerant and accepting the university community is of its Muslim student population. The Muslim Student Association is very active. They have a very vibrant community on campus that does a lot of service projects, very well integrated into the kind of the student life and the academic life of the community. I teach a lot of courses on Islamic history and introduction to Islam and courses like this for undergraduates, and the students by and large are very, very open-minded. They don't bring a lot of the same preconceptions that I found at some other places that I've taught.